I never thought helping my neighbor with a broken washing machine would change my life, but that one clumsy, awkward moment became the start of something I never saw coming. I've lived in my apartment for almost a year now, and though I knew my neighbor well enough to exchange polite nods in the hallway, we had never really spoken beyond that. She was the kind of woman who carried herself with a quiet confidence, always put together, even in the simplest clothes. Early 40s, I guessed, but with a kind of grace that made age feel irrelevant. That evening, I was back from work and half asleep on the couch when I heard it, strange muffled sounds through the thin walls we shared. At first, I thought maybe she dropped something heavy, but then there was a dull thud followed by her voice, strained but laughing nervously. Something about it didn't sound right. I hesitated, then knocked gently on her door. "Are you okay in there?" I called. After a beat, I heard her voice, laced with embarrassed amusement. Actually, could you maybe help me for a second?" When she opened the door, I had to bite back a smile. There she was, leaning awkwardly against her washing machine, one arm wedged deep inside the drum. Her hair, usually immaculate, was a little mussed, and her cheeks flushed pink with the effort. She gave me a look that was half defiant, half mortified. "I dropped a sock in the back," she explained quickly, as though she owed me a justification for being stuck. "And, well, apparently I'm not as flexible as I used to be." I chuckled softly, stepping into the small laundry room that smelled faintly of detergent and lavender fabric softener. "Here, let me," I said, moving closer. She shifted, but her arm was well and truly caught, and she winced as she tried to tug free. Instinctively, I placed a hand lightly against her back, steadying her so she wouldn't hurt herself. For a moment, I was hyper-aware of the closeness, the warmth of her body through the thin fabric of her blouse, the faint rise and fall of her breath as she tried again. "Okay, on 3. I murmured. 1, 2, pull." With a quick tug, she slipped free, nearly stumbling back into me. My arms caught her by reflex, and for a second she rested there, cheek brushing my shoulder, breathless but laughing at herself. "Graceful, aren't I?" she teased, pulling away, though her smile was tinged with embarrassment. "You're fine," I said, smiling back, though my heart was thudding faster than it should have been for such a simple moment. She shook her head, brushing hair from her face. "Well, thank you. I suppose I owe you for saving me from a tragic laundry room accident." It was light-hearted, even silly, but something in the way her eyes lingered on mine as she said it made the air between us feel heavier, charged in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't know it then, but that clumsy, ordinary evening, her stuck in a washing machine, me laughing quietly at the absurdity, would become the first thread in something neither of us could have planned. After the washing machine rescue, I thought that would be the end of it. A laugh, a thank you, and back to our separate evenings. But before I could excuse myself, she tilted her head, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Wait," she said. "At least let me make you some tea. It's the least I can do for humiliating myself in front of you." Her smile was warm, but there was still that quiet edge of embarrassment, and maybe something else too, an openness that hadn't been there before. I hesitated, but the truth was, I didn't want to leave. So I followed her into the kitchen. It was a small space, but it felt lived in, soft light above the counter, a stack of neatly folded dish towels, the faint hum of the laundry still turning behind us. The kind of place that told me she was organized, but also human. A book half open on the table, reading glasses resting on top. Details I had never noticed from the hallway. She busied herself at the kettle, and I sat at the table, trying not to look too out of place. "You really didn't have to," I started, but she cut me off with a small laugh. "Trust me, after that scene I think I do." When she set the mug in front of me, I noticed her hands first. Slim, graceful, with the faintest trace of detergent on her skin. She sat across from me, cradling her own cup, steam curling gently around her face. We talked. At first about small things, the building, the noisy neighbors, the weather. But gradually, the conversation slipped into something more personal. She admitted, with a sheepish grin, that she's used to doing everything herself, but moments like the washing machine reminded her that she wasn't invincible. There was no drama in the way she said it, no self-pity, just honesty. And that struck me. Because here was this woman who carried herself like she never needed help, like she had everything together, and now she was letting me see a softer, almost vulnerable side. I nodded slowly, fingers tracing the rim of my cup. Honestly, I get it. Sometimes, it's harder to ask for help than to just struggle through on your own. Her eyes met mine across the table, steady and thoughtful. And for the first time, I noticed the way they softened when she listened, like she wasn't just waiting for her turn to speak, but actually hearing me. Silence settled for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that made me aware of the clock ticking faintly in the corner, of the way the laundry still rumbled in the background, steady and ordinary. She leaned back in her chair, smiling faintly. "You know," she said, "you're easier to talk to than I expected." That comment shouldn't have meant as much as it did. But it stayed with me. By the time I left that night, tea finished and conversation still echoing in my mind, I realized something had shifted. She wasn't just my neighbor anymore. She was someone I suddenly wanted to know better, someone who, in the quiet glow of her kitchen, felt less like a stranger and more like a beginning. After that night in her kitchen, things between us began to change, subtly at first, like a door that had quietly cracked open. Before, we'd pass each other in the hallway with polite nods. Now, there was something different in the way her eyes lingered on mine, or how her smile seemed less automatic, more personal. A few days later, I ran into her in the lobby. She was balancing two heavy grocery bags, one threatening to split at the bottom. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "Here, let me," I said, reaching for the heavier one. She gave me that look again, the one halfway between pride and gratitude. "You don't have to." "I know," I answered, "but I want to." It was a simple exchange, but it carried weight. She didn't argue further, just let me walk beside her, both of us moving up the stairs together, side by side. I was aware of how close our arms were, brushing once, twice, as if testing boundaries either of us named. When we reached her apartment, she unlocked the door, and I set the bag on the counter. I was about to excuse myself when she surprised me. "Wait. Do you like pasta?" That night she insisted I take a plate of her cooking, rigatoni in a rich sauce that smelled like garlic and basil. I stood in her doorway holding the warm dish, her laughter soft behind me as I promised I'd return the plate clean. The next day, I did. And she tucked a small container of salad beside it, saying, "You can't live on pasta alone." It became a rhythm. Small gestures passing between us like unspoken messages. Her leftovers, my help carrying boxes, a casual check-in if she saw me coming home late. None of it seemed like much on the surface, but I felt the way each act stitched us closer. One evening, I dropped by to return yet another container. She opened the door with her hair pulled back, comfortable in a loose sweater, and for the first time I saw her not as the polished woman who moved gracefully through the building, but as someone quietly at ease in her own space. "Come in," she said, motioning me toward the kitchen. She poured me a glass of wine before I could decline, and we ended up sitting across from each other again, just like before. Her hand brushed mine as she passed the glass. It was such a small thing, accidental even, but the contact sent a spark through me. Warm, fleeting, but impossible to ignore. I caught myself studying the lines of her face as she talked, how her smile didn't just curve her lips but reached her eyes, how the faint creases near them only made her look more alive, more real. I tried to play it cool, to just listen, but inside I knew. Something was building. Not just attraction, but a pull. A gravity I hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. By the time I left that night, I realized it wasn't just the food, or the help, or the casual conversations. It was her. Slowly, without either of us meaning to, she was becoming the part of my day I looked forward to most. It was a quiet evening when it happened. The kind of night where the world feels hushed, the air cool against the windows, and time moves just a little slower. She had invited me over, nothing elaborate, just a simple Come by if you're free. When I stepped inside, I noticed the warm, homey smell of fabric softener filling the air. The dryer was running, tumbling clothes in its steady rhythm, and she had a small pile of laundry on the couch. Without thinking, I sat beside her and began folding a towel. She laughed softly. You don't have to do that. I know, I said, folding it anyway. But maybe I want to. We fell into an easy silence, folding side by side. The fabric was warm against my hands, almost comforting. Every so often, our fingers brushed when we both reached for the same piece, and each time there was a small spark, so subtle, yet impossible to ignore. At one point she paused, holding a shirt halfway folded. Her eyes softened, but her expression grew more serious. Can I be honest with you? I set the towel down, meeting her gaze. Of course. She hesitated, searching for the right words. Then she sighed, her voice quieter than usual. Sometimes I wonder what this must look like, you here with me, helping me fold laundry. You're so young and I'm... She trailed off, shaking her head lightly. I mean, I'm in my 40s. People would laugh. Her words landed heavier than I expected. For a moment I just watched her, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the fabric in her lap. Beneath her usual confidence, there it was again, the quiet vulnerability she so rarely let anyone see. I leaned back slightly, choosing my words with care. You know, I don't really care what people would say. When I'm here, with you, it doesn't feel strange. It feels right. Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, as if she wasn't sure she could believe me. I don't think about numbers, I continued. I think about how I feel when I'm around you. How you actually listen when I talk. How the world feels a little calmer here, like I can just breathe. The hum of the dryer filled the silence. She blinked, and for a second I thought I saw her eyes glisten. She quickly looked down, folding the shirt with deliberate precision, as though keeping her hands busy would steady her. You make it sound simple, she whispered. Maybe it is simple, I said. We're the ones who complicate it. For a long moment neither of us moved. The space between us seemed charged, the air heavier, as though the unspoken words lingered just out of reach. Finally, she smiled faintly, a mix of sadness and something like hope. We went back to folding clothes, but the mood had shifted. Something fragile had been admitted, laid bare between us. And though she tried to brush it aside, I knew we were no longer pretending this was just neighborly kindness. This was something deeper. Something neither of us could ignore. The following week, I stopped by to return a dish she'd loaned me. It should have been a quick exchange, a simple thank you at the door. But she invited me in, saying she had just finished tidying up. Her apartment was softly lit, the kind of warm glow that made the walls feel closer, more intimate. The faint scent of detergent lingered again, mixing with something floral, her perfume, maybe. She was standing by the laundry basket, folding a few shirts, and without thinking, I joined her. We talked about little things, work, the neighbors, the way the building's ancient elevator seemed to break every other week. It was easy, natural. But beneath the light conversation, I felt it, the quiet pull between us, stronger than ever. At one point, she looked up, squinting slightly. Hold still, she said, stepping closer. You've got lint all over your shirt. Before I could respond, her hand was on my chest, brushing gently. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as if the lint were taking its time to disappear. The fabric tugged lightly under her touch, and I felt the warmth of her palm even through the cotton. I froze, not out of discomfort, but because of how intensely aware I was of her. The sound of the dryer spinning faded into the background. The air between us thickened, her nearness drawing me in. She glanced up, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment the world held still. I could feel my breath catch, my pulse quickening. Without realizing it, I leaned ever so slightly toward her, as if the space between us were meant to close. Her hand lingered a heartbeat longer, then stilled against me. It would have been so easy to bridge the gap. To close that distance with a kiss that had been building in silence for weeks. But she stepped back. Her hand dropped to her side, and she turned away quickly, her voice softer, almost apologetic. "This is complicated." The words cut through the haze, grounding me. I swallowed hard, nodding, though every part of me resisted the distance she just re-established. "I know," I said quietly. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The dryer buzzed, signaling the end of its cycle, and she busied herself pulling clothes from it. I stood there, watching her fold a towel with careful precision, her back turned slightly toward me. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, to let her know that what I felt wasn't some fleeting attraction. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just stayed there, in the silence we'd created. My chest still buzzed from the warmth of her touch, my mind replaying the way her eyes had searched mine in that suspended second. When I finally left that evening, the air outside felt cooler, sharper. I walked home with my hands in my pockets, torn between frustration and longing. Because now I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't just in my head. She felt it too. And that made it all the harder to let go. I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed after that evening, the one where she pulled away. But the truth is, everything had changed. Once you come that close to something real, something electric, you can unfeel it. For a couple of days I barely saw her. Our doors stayed closed, and though we passed in the hallway once, we exchanged only a polite smile. It felt like a step back, and the distance gnawed at me. On the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood outside her apartment, hand raised to knock, and hesitated. My chest was tight with doubt. What if I was reading too much into all this? What if she regretted everything? But then I remembered the way her hand had lingered against my chest, the way her eyes had softened in that moment. That wasn't my imagination. I knocked. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, maybe even guarded. She was in a simple cardigan and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders, and for a second I nearly lost my words. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment was dimly lit, only the glow of a lamp in the corner. It made everything feel hushed, intimate. We sat across from each other on the couch. She folded her hands in her lap, waiting. I could see it, the way she braced herself, like she already knew what was coming. I took a breath. "I don't want to keep pretending this is just neighborly kindness. Not after everything." Her eyes flickered to mine, then down again. "I told you, it's complicated." "I know," I said. "I know what people might think. That I'm too young, that you're older, that it doesn't make sense on paper. But when I'm here with you, none of that matters. I feel more understood with you than I have with anyone in years." She shook her head slightly, her lips pressed together. "You don't know what you're saying. I've lived long enough to know how these things can look." "Then let me say it differently," I murmured, leaning forward. "When you pull away, it hurts. And that alone tells me this is real." Her breath caught, just barely. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes shimmering in the lamplight. For a moment, her composure slipped. "You make me feel," she began, but stopped, as though the words were too dangerous. Finally, she whispered, "Like I'm wanted. And that scares me." I swallowed, my chest tightening. It scares me too. But maybe that means it's worth something. Silence fell, heavy and raw. She reached for the wine glass on the table, but her hand trembled slightly. I covered it with mine before she could pull back. Her skin was warm, soft, and when her fingers stilled under mine, it felt like the world stopped holding its breath. She didn't pull away this time. For the first time, she let the moment stand. Vulnerable, fragile, but undeniable. After that night, something shifted. Not in some grand, dramatic way, but in a quieter, deeper sense. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't crossed any bold line. Yet the simple act of not pulling away, of letting our hands rest together, changed everything. The next evening, she invited me over again. There was no pretense, no groceries to carry, no dishes to return, no laundry to fold. Just a simple message slipped under my door, If you're free, come by. When I walked in, her apartment felt warmer than usual, though maybe it was just me. The hum of the washing machine filled the background again, steady and rhythmic, as if echoing the unspoken heartbeat between us. She was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped loosely across her lap, her hair falling naturally around her face. "Sit," she said softly, patting the space beside her. I did, and the quiet wrapped around us. For a while, we didn't talk. The TV played faintly in the background, though either of us paid attention. My arm rested along the back of the couch, close enough that my fingers nearly brushed her shoulder. Then, slowly, she shifted closer. Her hand found mine, tentative at first, as though she was testing whether I'd pull away. I didn't. Our fingers laced together, and I felt her exhale, long and steady, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fiery. But it was honest. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her cheek soft against the fabric of my shirt. I could feel the warmth of her, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the quiet steadiness of her presence. My free hand rested lightly against the blanket on her lap, and she let it stay there, safe and unhurried. For a long while, we just sat that way. The world outside could have judged, whispered, questioned, but in that small, glowing space, none of it mattered. What mattered was the simple fact that she wasn't pushing me away anymore. She was letting herself lean, just enough to show me trust. At one point, she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know what this is going to be." I turned slightly, pressing my cheek gently against the top of her head. "We don't have to know," I murmured. "We just have to be here. Right now." Her fingers tightened around mine in response, a silent agreement. The washing machine clicked off, the last spin cycle ending in a soft mechanical sigh. The apartment was quiet again, save for the steady rhythm of two people choosing, in their own quiet way, not to walk away. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. No dramatic declarations, no sweeping gestures. Just her hand in mine, her head against my shoulder, and the quiet realization that sometimes, the smallest acts of closeness can feel like the bravest. That night, for the first time, it felt like we weren't standing on opposite sides of hesitation anymore. We were simply together.